Well, hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for coming. My name is Catherine Brunel, and in just a minute, I will be introducing Representative Linsky and a few others that are here tonight in our discussion on state aid. But first, let me welcome you and thank you for being here. Before we begin, just a couple things for us to note. Tonight's call is being recorded, and we are grateful to have Pegasus, Natick's public access channel, broadcasting it live on the TV. So welcome to everyone that's joining us from home. We wanted to let you know that the chat box is open, and in our previous forums, we have found that to be a useful tool to receive questions and for people to share resources with one another. For example, if you are a town meeting member and you'd like to share your precinct and name, especially if you'll be in the election tomorrow, we'd love to know that. We will publish the content of the forum, or sorry, of the chat box, especially if it's helpful. So feel free to use it. Just know that it will be available afterwards to others. And with that, let's get started. So the agenda for tonight is to give you a bit of state aid for Natick, to hear remarks from Representative David Linsky, to have a group discussion, and then at the very end, if you stay with us, to engage you on how you can help. During the group discussion, we will be taking questions from the audience and from the chat box. If we're not able to get to all of the questions tonight, just because our time will be short, we will do our best to collect all of the questions and to send them on your behalf to the state leaders and let them reply to you. When I say we, I wanted to let you know that this forum tonight is hosted by Protect Natick's Future. You see us here, many of us on the team, the lead team. We are residents of Natick, and we are deeply invested in helping citizens better understand the current funding situation. We are here to ensure that our voices are heard among the town's leaders and to endorse solutions and encourage collaboration across the departments. It's really COVID-19 that got us all involved, and now that we're here, we're grateful to be having the ability to speak to people. So with that, I'd like to introduce Emily Grant. She is featured on our website as our math guru and our budget videos, and she's going to go over some background on state aid.
Okay, can you guys hear me okay? Okay, so what's happening now as a result of COVID is that a major loss in revenue is projected for FY21 for our town. And one piece of that revenue loss is a reduction or projected reduction in state aid. Right now, the projection is down $3.4 million. So we're so grateful to have all our guests here tonight to be able to give us some context around that and allow us to ask some questions about that. Can you go to the next slide? Sorry. So that's okay. So this little pie graph shows the revenue that is appropriated in town meeting. And so 10% of the revenue that's appropriated in town meeting comes from state aid. And so some categories of state aid are Chapter 70, you've heard probably something about, and all these other pieces. And so in FY20, that chunk was 14.9 million. Obviously, that's going to be different this year. It's also important to note that there is other state aid that comes through that's not in this purple chunk, like state aid for road improvements. And then you may have heard of circuit breaker. That's not in this purple chunk because that goes directly to something specific. Circuit breaker goes directly to special ed. So I'm sure we will hear more about that tonight. And this is just a little background of Natick state aid allocation through the years. So it's important to note that there's always fluctuations in state aid, right? That's dependent on the economy and what's happening in the towns. And what's happening in Natick is happening more broadly through the state. And so one thing to look at when we look at this data is before COVID in January, our town administrator projected $14.5 million coming in that state aid allocation, and now it's down closer to between 11 and 12 million. And so when we look through this data, we look for patterns of what happened. So a lot of people have been saying, well, what happened during the recession in 09, 010, 08. And you can see in FY10, there was a big reduction in state aid. And so, questions to be thinking are, is this something that we learn from and we model from, or is COVID a completely different animal? And so our guests can speak more to that tonight.
Great, thank you, Emily. And about our guests tonight, we want to thank, before they give their remarks, we just want to thank them for being here. We have people that are here from both Senator Karen Spilka's office and Senator Becca Rausch's office. So just a hello to Dennis Giambotti. He's the district liaison for Senate President Karen Spilka. He's also a former city councilor in Framingham. And as many of us have loved to learn about the Finance Committee, Dennis Giambotti served on their Finance Committee in Framingham. Evan Barry is also here with us from Senator Becca Rausch's office and made the video available that we'll be showing at the very end. And additionally, unfortunately, I don't have their photos, but hopefully you'll see them in the presentation tonight. Lizzie Roach is here. She's the research director, and Connor Green, legislative aide with they're both here with our keynote presenter, David Linsky. And before I turn it over to him, I wanted to say that I first met David outside of Roach Brothers in Natick. I had just moved to town, and at that time I had no specific concerns, but it did impress me that he was available, and I'm particularly happy that he's accessible tonight. Representative Linsky hails from Natick. He's even a 1975 grad of Natick Public High School. He's been a lifelong public servant, first serving as the assistant district attorney, and then in 1999, he was elected a member of the House of Representatives. His work for Natick, Sherborne, and Millis is constituent-based. He's been named Legislator of the Year in multiple times by several groups. One thing in particular about our work tonight that's especially relevant is that David served as the House Chairman of the Joint Committee on Federal Stimulus Oversight to make sure that Massachusetts maximized access to funding during the 2008 economic crisis. He's literally lived and led through difficult economic times in our recent history, and for that, we're grateful to hear his thoughts, especially about our situation today. So with no further ado, I will turn it over to him and his staff with a big welcome and a thank you for doing this.
So thank you very much, Catherine, for giving me the opportunity to share a few thoughts with you tonight. And I particularly appreciate when concerned citizens get together and try to make Natick a better place. And I applaud the work that you and your organization have been doing. I don't often get involved in the nitty-gritty of budget situations in the town of Natick. I see my job as principally to try to bring in as much state aid and state funds and a whole variety of sources as I can, and then let the elected and appointed officials in the town of Natick make those decisions. So I'm happy to share a lot of information here, and I've now been doing this for 20 years. So I think I can put this in perspective. Let me say first, my commitment to Natick is simple, and that is to maximize the amount of state aid from whatever line items and whatever sources there may be in this and in every fiscal year. This is a particularly tough fiscal year. Before the COVID-19 crisis hit, we were expecting a very robust fiscal year. The Massachusetts state budget overall that we vote on typically in April in the House, and we haven't been able to vote on it yet, runs around $44 or $45 billion. That's what our projection was. Right now, our economists are telling us, based on the tax revenues that have been coming in thus far, is that we are running a budget deficit statewide of between $6 billion and $7 billion. And so we have to find that somewhere. Now, under the Constitution in Massachusetts, we have to pass a balanced budget. That's in the Constitution. We're not like the federal government that can run a deficit and can literally print money. So we have to take the projections that we were and somehow cut $6 or $7 billion out of that whole entire state budget. So when we look at the state budget overall, we realize that there are some very big categories that take up a lot of that state budget. The largest category to begin with is healthcare in one fashion or another. And when I say healthcare, that means Massachusetts' share of Medicaid, which is Mass Health, and then support for hospitals, and then health insurance for public employees. That's a significant chunk as well. And healthcare in one form or another typically takes up between 30 and 40% of the entire state budget. Then the next biggest chunk is local aid to cities and towns. And when I say local aid, there are several pots within that local aid category. The biggest is the so-called Chapter 70, which is direct aid to school districts in the state. Then what is called unrestricted local aid, but there are several other pots that are important and particularly important to the town of Natick. One significant pot is a special education circuit breaker line item, and that's something that I've worked on very hard for a number of years. Other local aid types is called pilot, which is payment in lieu of taxes for state-owned land. And then the METCO line item, that's state aid that comes into the town of Natick, as well as several other smaller pots. In addition to that, the entire state budget has to fund things like the University of Massachusetts, the state colleges and universities, the community colleges, the state police, roads and bridges throughout the entire state, and all of the various social services that we have to care for those people in our state who are most vulnerable. And it all adds up to $45 billion. So then when we're hit with an unexpected revenue shortfall, we have to start looking at what various line items can be reduced. And realistically, the Mass Health line item, which is the biggest line item, really can't be reduced. That's an entitlement program, and it's an important entitlement program, particularly during a time of pandemic. This is providing health insurance for millions and millions of people throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So we have to start looking at all of the line items to see what we can do. Now, this is assuming, and this is a big assumption, this is assuming that there is no additional federal aid that comes into Massachusetts, and we'll talk about that later this evening. What obviously we in every other state in the nation are hoping for is something of a federal assistance program that would fill our budget gap, the budget gap of Rhode Island and Connecticut and New York and every one of the 50 states out there, and we could get out of this problem. What you'll hear is in Congress, the House of Representatives has passed such a bill. They appropriated $3 trillion with a T, trillion dollars. But the Senate has not taken up that bill, and the President Trump, has not indicated whether or not he would like to see that happen. So that bill is literally sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk right now. If that bill passes, we're out of this woods. And the town of Natick and every other of the 351 cities and towns is out of the woods. But we can't rely on that right now because that hasn't happened yet. And we don't know if and or when that is going to happen. So we're now trying to redo the entire budget. Now, the way the budget process works in a typical year is first the governor files his budget recommendations in January. And when he did that, obviously it was pre-COVID, the economy was humming along pretty well. And he proposed in a total of about $15 million in combined local aid and Chapter 70 aid for the town of Natick. Then the world as we knew it ended. And obviously, we've been through a lot throughout this country, and we've lost over 100,000 people, and our economy is tanked, and we know that. And hopefully, we're going to get out of this. But the reality is because the bottom fell out in revenues, and because physically we can't go to the State House to do a budget debate right now, Massachusetts hasn't passed a state budget yet. So what happened was, as far as Natick is concerned, Natick, in a very prudent fiscal manner, they did a very conservative budget projection on state aid, and they took last year's figures and cut 20% off it, 1/5 of the budget, and that is what the town administrator and the town finance committee is basing their budget predictions on right now. And it's a very conservative approach, but I applaud them for doing it, because at the end of the day, it's a whole lot easier to add money into a budget than to cut money from a budget. So that's a worst case scenario, I think. I'm hopeful that we're going to do better than that. And I'm hopeful that that relief will either come in the form of federal aid, or if there's no federal aid, that will still do better than that 20% cut. So I'm hopeful. And I also I have to also say, I understand how painful these potential cuts are to the people in Natick. I get it. I live and die by Natick Public Schools, and I live and die by the superb town services that we get here. We get great town services in Natick, the school department, the fire department, the police department. The Board of Health has been doing a phenomenal job, as well as DPW, trash collection, water and sewer, all of that. We get great town services. And we get better town services than virtually any other town or city in the state. We really do. In addition to that, the budget shortfall that the town of Natick is looking at, quite frankly, is one of the smaller budget shortfalls for a city or town the size of Natick anywhere in the state. We're in better shape than virtually any other city or town in Natick, even with these cuts. There's a state law that requires that teachers who are going to be laid off have to be notified in June every year. It is my understanding Natick sent out 0 layoff notices to teachers in Natick. Brookline sent out over 120. Most other towns have sent out significant numbers of layoff notices. In addition to that, Natick is in a better financial situation by how much money we have in our various stabilization fund accounts than most other cities and towns. I look at this stuff on a statewide basis, and I have a little bit of perspective here. So I clearly don't want any cuts in Natick, I will say that. I'm a lifelong Natick resident who takes a lot of pride in what I always refer to as the greatest town in the greatest state and the greatest country in the history of the universe. And I mean that with all sincerity. But we're doing okay. We really are. We're doing okay. And I have a great deal of confidence in the appointed and elected officials in Natick that we're going to be able to figure this out. That's a little bit of an overview of where we are right now. I'm happy to go as deep into the weeds as anybody on this call wants me to go. But let me just do a little bit of history. And I know that we have some slides out there as well that can show this. So I asked my staff, who's also Connie Green and Lizzie Roach, 2 members of my staff in the State House, just to pull the last 5 fiscal years. And we've gone in Chapter 70, which is the principal state aid account, from 8.6 million in FY15 to in FY20, the year that we're in right now, to 10.1 million. That's a significant increase. And then I also looked up, just for a little perspective, what Chapter 70 was when I first got elected back in 1999. And Chapter 70 then was 3 million. So in the 20 years that I've been a state rep for Natick, Sherburne, and Millis, Natick's Chapter 70 has more than tripled. It's actually almost 4 times what it was. In addition to that, I mentioned the special ed circuit breaker line item. And that's very important to me. And let me tell you a little bit. This is a little bit of inside baseball. Every year, I try to get as many dollars into the special ed circuit breaker line item as possible, because quite simply is this: for every dollar that goes into the special ed circuit breaker, Natick, and in addition to that, Sherburne and Millis, the other 2 towns I represent, get more out of that dollar than a dollar put into the Chapter 70 formula. Because the Chapter 70 formula has a whole bunch of different weighted factors that I won't go into. But Natick, because it is a comparatively affluent town, at least compared to the 351 cities and towns out there in Massachusetts, doesn't get as high a percentage as we do in dollars put into the special education circuit breaker account, because that is done on a per student basis as needed. And so we're better off with more money put into the special ed circuit breaker account. So you'll note that that has dramatically increased over the last 5 years. It was at 257 million in FY15, and that in the last fiscal year, the one we're finishing on now, it's at 345 million. That's really where I put my attention. In addition to that, I put a lot of attention into the METCO line item, which Natick gets a significant amount out of. I'm actually the chair of the METCO caucus in the House now, and I make sure that that line item for that extremely important program is well funded every year. So that's my introduction. I'm happy to answer any questions on where we are right now.
Could you just say what METCO is for anybody that doesn't know?
Sure. METCO is a very important program that brings, it operates basically in 2 cities, mostly in Boston, but also in Springfield. And it allows students who apply that wish to go to a suburban high school, including Natick. Natick is one of the participating towns, to attend. Actually, Natick does it in middle school and in the high school, to attend school in Natick, and they become full members of the Natick public school community. Those kids work incredibly hard. They get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and take a bus from Boston out to Natick or Dover, or Sherburne, or Needham or Wellesley or wherever they're going, and usually don't get back home until about 6 o'clock at night, sometimes later if they're playing sports. Everybody benefits by METCO. Everybody benefits by METCO. And it's a great program that I will always fully support. And I applaud the school committee in Natick and the administration in Natick for years for fully supporting METCO.
That's great. Thank you, David. Does anyone have a question that they would like to ask directly to the representative? And while we're waiting, we'll look for some hands. Ken, let me know if you see anyone. One thing I wanted to note is that you mentioned that the 20% reduction in state aid, the projection that Natick has chosen, is a worst case scenario. Is there any way that you can help us understand that as the worst case scenario? Because
Sure.
there's definitely some fear that we're moving some things down the line, and we're waiting for fall town meeting to appropriate some monies. And there's definitely some fear that, while we haven't had to lay anyone off yet, that, what's the potential for that down the road?
I can tell you this. My highest priority as a legislature is to maximize local aid in Chapter 70 to the 3 towns in my district. And I am certain that Senator Spilka and Senator Roush feel exactly the same way. And I can also tell you that the vast majority of my colleagues in the House, and I'm sure the Senate feels the same way, want to maximize local aid in Chapter 70 accounts as well. So what I'm saying is we're not going to let that happen, that we're going to find some way to make sure that that is a worst case scenario. Some towns out there took a more aggressive budgeting approach, I'm going to say, and maybe did a 5% cut or a 10% cut or a level aid. I know some cities and towns did level aid, level funding. That scares me, quite frankly, because it would, as I said, it is a lot easier to add money into a budget after it's been passed than to make those cuts mid-year. I just know how important those line items are to me and to my colleagues, because they're not line items. They're real people. Behind every line item is, in this case, is a school child at Johnson or Wilshire or Benham or Memorial or Brown or the two middle schools or the high school. And, you know, I'm going to fight like crazy to make sure that doesn't happen. I can tell you that.
Yeah. And I appreciate that. I do want to ask, you know, come July 11th, hopefully we'll pass a balanced budget in the town of Natick with these projections. And at that point, as far as I understand it, the schools will, you know, will have received their budget, and then they will be doing some problem solving around how to live within that budget, you know, and the town will have their budget. So at that point, my understanding is that the Chapter 70 aid would not affect the town. And I would like to know what we, you know, from the town side, how can we advocate or just, you know, hope that all of those special services that you spoke about at the beginning stay consistent or stay level?
Yeah, well, you know, just before I was a state rep, I was a town meeting member for 14 years, and you know, I've seen, you know, Natick's budgets go up and down through the years depending on economic circumstances, and Natick historically is populated by people, whether they're on the select board of selectmen or on the school committee, or the finance committee or town meeting, who care intensely about trying to do the right thing. And I mean that in all sincerity. And we have a history of good, professional, sound fiscal management on both the town side and the school side. And we'll figure this out. We really will. We don't have big wars in Natick. We're always able to work things out, and I'm confident that that will happen again. I've had some conversations with some of the town officials over the past few days, and I'm suggesting that they try to put together a budget that has the ability to add programs into it as in the scenario where more state aid or federal aid becomes available, in that to try to stay flexible. In addition to that, to try to keep the budget open from a fiscal standpoint, at least until school starts, you know, around September 1st. Because, you know, I think that we're going to know, if we don't know during the month of July, we're going to know during the month of August about whether or not there's going to be any federal aid coming, or we're going to know whether or not there's any more state aid coming. What I promised the selectmen and the town administrator today, that on July 10th, the night before town meeting on July 11th, I will give my best up-to-date estimate that day, so that the town meeting will know on July 11th what they're doing. there's
You're
a
going to
chance.
add drama. You're going to add
Yeah,
more drama to an
well,
already dramatic town meeting.
exactly. I tend to be, as a person, I tend to, you can ask anybody this, I tend to be drama averse. But the reality is I want to be able to give the most up-to-date information possible. What I'm hopeful, of course, is that in the next, I guess we have 12, 13 days now before then, that we can have a better idea of what's going on with the state budget by then. I doubt we'll know anything from the federal government at that point.
And that actually segues into a question that we have from one of the participants in the chat box. Wayne has asked, when do you anticipate that the state legislature will convene to discuss and pass a budget?
Oh, Wayne, I wish that I knew. I will say that. This is tough. It's tough from a couple of reasons. One, there's really three factors here. In that, number one, the State House is currently closed, although I am one of 8 people who is designated by the Speaker to go in when we have votes to be taken to be essentially a proxy voter on a conference call with my colleagues under emergency rules that we passed. But when we do a state budget, there are typically 1,000 amendments filed to a state budget. Ranging, dealing with every city and town and every line item and every type of budget. I'm not sure we can pass it remotely, whether or not we can physically get that done. If we have to, we'll figure out a way to do it, but it will be kind of a bare bones exercise. That's number one. Mm-hmm. Number two, the economic situation and the revenue standpoint in Massachusetts, as well as the rest of the country, changes every single day. And as I said, we have a constitutional obligation to pass a balanced budget. And before we vote on a budget, we need to know what the revenue estimate is. And that revenue estimate has been changing every single day. This is an unprecedented situation, obviously. This is much worse than the fiscal crisis of 2008, much worse in terms of the impact on the economy. And, we were able to get through that with some good help from the federal government. I'm hoping that that happens again. But we've got a very different situation in Congress and in the White House than we did in 2008 than we do now. In 2008, we had a Senate, a Congress, and a president who were all on the same page. And we don't have that today, and it's a bad situation.
So, and to that point, Natick has definitely been nervous about the 1/12 budget for our own town. What repercussions are going to happen in Massachusetts, on a state 1/12 budget? So this idea of deficit spending scares people.
Yeah. Well, we actually passed some legislation that allows a town to sort of anticipate state revenue coming in and to be able to deficit spend. Special legislation just for this year. Mm-hmm. And the state will be making the local aid payments on July 1st, August 1st, September 1st, if we're passing 1/12 budgets. We've already passed a 1/12 budget for July. We base the local aid figures actually on a full funding from FY20, 1/12 of that. So Natick will get its payment on July 1st for Chapter 70 and on local aid for 1/12 of the fiscal 20 with no cuts. Now, I just want to caution. What happens, of course, is if there is that worst case scenario, the 20% cut, that means at the end of the fiscal year, those payments are going to be a lot smaller, if you think about it.
Yeah.
So that's a little concerning. But, Natick can, and every other city and town can continue to exist. They're not going to be bouncing any checks because they'll be getting these state aid payments. And they're obviously getting you know, that the town is obviously getting the bulk of their revenue from local property tax payments, and those are still coming in now. Nobody's had their, I mean, people are still paying their local property taxes, or at least I certainly hope they.
Correct. Yeah, and that's where we get most of our. That's how we
Yeah,
fund
that's the
most things
vast
in Natick.
majority of the revenue in town.
Correct.
Well, what we have to be careful about, though, on property taxes is, you know, Natick, thankfully, and this is one reason why we've been so successful fiscally, is we have a significant commercial and industrial property tax base in Natick, and we expect that those property taxes, those values to start decreasing as businesses close. So that's going to create a problem, maybe not in this fiscal year, but in next fiscal year and further.
Well, and that's another question we have in the chat box right now, is that there is, you know, a deep fear for fiscal year 22.
Right.
Can you provide us any insight on how state aid is expected to change in FY22?
Yeah, this is all, you know, look, I want the economy to rebound 100%. I want people to get back to work. I want unemployment to get down to 0 rather than the 15 or 16 or 17% it is right now. But it's just way too early to start thinking about that. You know, we're trying to deal with a crisis of unprecedented proportions right now.
Yeah. And I don't want to put you too much on the spot, because I know that you bring the money in, or you help us get as much money as possible, and you let the towns decide. But you said it tonight, and we've heard it in Board of Selectmen meetings about this idea of in the fall we're going to need to be nimble. I'm assuming we're going to need to be nimble in FY22 as well. So what does that mean from your perspective? What advice do you have for our town leaders?
Yeah.
What does that mean to us as citizens? What does being nimble mean?
You know, I think that the town has to think about what are its priorities, because I don't think we can have everything. You know, I mean, it's tough. You know, it depends on where you want to, you know, spread a little bit of the pain. You know, I don't want to see the schools cut. I don't want DPW cut. I don't want police cut. I don't want fire cut. God knows I don't want the Board of Health cut. You know, and community services, the senior center, you know, a rec department. It's all important stuff. But to try to go through the budget and find areas where we can maybe trim a little. But like I said, as painful as this exercise is, Natick is in much better shape than most other cities and towns. We really are. And, you know, we've always figured this out. We've always had good professional management, and we've had good dedicated people on the Board of Selectmen and school committee and FinCom and town meeting. They're going to figure this out. They really will. I've seen this movie before.
And a shout out to our FinCom members, because they're going to be meeting tomorrow and on Thursday. They've already put hundreds of hours of work into this kind of process. So we do want to acknowledge them. And to all of our town leaders, I know a couple of the Board of Selectmen are with us tonight, and I see school committee members. We do know that everyone's working hard. One piece that I wanted to ask about, you know, in our initial letter to you, we very much acknowledge that we recognize a certain privilege in Natick, and that when we ask for state aid, especially when we want to support you in getting federal aid, we understand that that's not just for students in Natick, but in general, that's for the state of Massachusetts. These states are struggling, you know, and so we don't want to sound, you know, or seem that we are, you know, in a bubble in Natick and not aware of how lucky that we are, and that other places have it harder. To that point, you know, you said that the HEROES Act is sitting on a desk. You know, what can we do? And is there movement? What's the debate? You know, what's the history?
So, you know, I know that Congresswoman Clark worked very hard to help get that bill through the House of Representatives. And I know that Senator Markey and Senator Warren fully support getting that bill passed in the Senate. The issue, quite frankly, is Mitch McConnell and the Republican leadership in the U.S. Senate, that they have to hear from the state and local officials in those states that they are hurting just as badly, if not worse, than the people in Massachusetts. It's, you know, Kentucky has to call out to Mitch McConnell, and South Carolina has to call out to Lindsey Graham, and Texas has to call out to John Cornyn, because they, you know, those cities and towns are going to be hurting too. And, you know, and I quite frankly, I'm starting to feel a little bit of movement in the White House, believe it or not, in favor of the bill, and that may help it push it out of the Senate too. But right now, it's not moving in the Senate.
So what I'm hearing, I have family in Ohio. I'm sure people on this call have family all over the country.
Yeah.
I would say call them, reach out. They don't want to hear from Massachusetts.
Let me say this. I don't want to make this too much of a political thing, but if you know anybody in a state that is represented by a Republican United States senators, we need 4 votes to flip in the U.S. Senate, 4 Republicans to flip on this issue. And the way they're going to flip is if state and local budgets start to tank in those states.
Thank you. And I mean, I agree with you, because it's not like nobody wants to trim, right? Everyone knows that in a recession, cuts have to be made, but the question comes at what point, you know? And I know specifically here in Natick, even Protect Natick's Future honestly grew out of a slide presentation by the school committee or by the superintendent where Johnson Elementary was on a list of cuts. And, you know, you mentioned before that Chapter 70 is not just a line item, that it's actually people's jobs, it's their lifestyle.
No, it's kids.
Can you?
It's kids.
Yeah, exactly. And could you speak to that? I mean, that's a very personal issue here in Natick. It's a question we've had asked in the chat anonymously. You know, is there something that we can do to prevent something as drastic as a school being closed?
Sure. Well, let me say this. I went to Natick Public Schools. Proud Benham, Wilson, Natick High graduate. My kids went to Benham and Wilson, and one went to Natick High. I care, and as people know, I hold the down marker at Natick High School football games. I bleed, absolutely bleed red and blue, and people know this. You know, I sure don't want to see a school close, whether it's Johnson or anything else on my watch. I will say that. And so I will do, you know, whatever I can to keep that from happening. My understanding, and this is a school committee decision, is that that does not appear to be a likely scenario now. And that's a good thing. But, you know, the way that you keep bad things from happening and keep good things happening is to do exactly what you're doing. It's, you know, it's to get a group of people together who care, who get involved. And I'm so happy to see, I suppose it's the Johnson School parents who've led this charge and rose up a little bit, because we need new generations, quite frankly, to do this. You know, my kids have now, they're in their 20s and they've graduated. And I've seen several generations of Natick kids and Natick parents come through since I've been the state rep. And we need this energy. We need this involvement to get involved. And I know that lots and lots of people are now running for town meeting. In the election tomorrow, shout out, if you haven't cast your absentee ballot yet, the polls are open from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. at 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. tomorrow at all the regular polling places. Get out and vote, because I often say this: local government has more direct effect on your lives than even the President of the United States or the U.S. Senate or Congress or something that happens in the State House. I truly believe that. Local government decides what your kid's school is like, whether or not your road gets paved, whether or not the police show up at your house, and whether or not the fire department shows up and the ambulance shows up. It's incredibly important. And so I applaud everybody who's on this call right now and everybody who's been following these issues for getting involved. Sometimes it takes a crisis to get people involved, and I'm glad to see this has happened.
Thank you. We do have one more question from the chat box, and I want to make sure that anyone that's live, if you would like to ask a question. So I'm going to ask this question from the chat box, but then if anyone wants to turn on their video and ask a question directly to Representative Linsky, please do that. The question in the chat box is about stabilization funds.
Sure.
We've heard that Natick is taking a conservative approach to spreading ours out, but we also know that the state has stabilization funds. Can you speak to those funds and if they would be something that we could see later?
Yeah, we're going to use, so Massachusetts, at least going into this year, had one of the most robust, we call it a rainy day fund in the country. But we know that we're going to have to dip into that rainy day fund to help balance the budget when we pass it this year. It's not raining right now. It is pouring and lightning and thundering out there. So we're going to use it. It may be as much as, we may use 20, 25, 35, 40% of it. That decision hasn't been made yet. And I know that the town, the town elected and appointing officials are making a similar type, judgment for Natick. What you have to be careful about, though, is the reason you have a stabilization fund is two reasons. There are two reasons. Number one, you want it for when it rains, and now it's raining. But then number two, it also greatly affects your bond rating. And both the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the town of Natick have been fortunate enough to have a significant stabilization or rainy day fund, and that has helped our bond rate. In Natick, we got a great bond price for that little construction project we have going on in Mill Street right now, and a little construction project we have going on at the corner of Route 9 and Speen Street. Those are two very significant construction projects going on. And because of our excellent bond rating, we got good interest rates. If you don't have a good bond rating, you pay more, and you pay more in the long run. So obviously you need to be careful.
Thank you. And I do think Protect Natick's Future is going to be doing another forum eventually about bond ratings and stabilization funds, because we think that is a question that's not going to go away for Natick in the coming years.
No, it isn't, because Natick's going to have to face this again next year, clearly.
Yeah, thank you. Is there any questions out there percolating in the audience? I meant to say, are there any questions? Excuse me.
Martin has a question.
Oh, great, Martin. I was going to say. Martin Kessel, do you have a question? Oh, they don't.
No,
okay.
sorry, no, it was a mistake that we pressed the wrong one. Sorry.
Oh, no problem. My assumption is everyone's video's off and they're making dinner right now. So,
Can I ask a question?
Please.
So we've heard a lot about the CARES Act, and Natick has applied for 3.1 million. That's federal funding, but it comes through the state. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So the CARES Act was a bill that was actually passed by the House of Representatives and the Senate and signed into law by President Trump, that sent money to the states for the purpose of paying for unanticipated expenses because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So that the first type of thing it would be used for would be, say, for example, if the Board of Health had to hire extra people to deal with health-related issues. That's an obvious one. Or whether or not the fire and police department had to buy protective gear or protective equipment for their personnel. That's an obvious one. For the school department, the way it factored in was all of the changes that the school department had to make relative to transitioning very quickly and quite well, I have to say, from in-class learning to distance learning, as well as obviously some PPE issues and some other issues as well. So this is a reimbursement program. Every city and town was eligible for a certain amount of money based on their population. Based on Natick's population, they're eligible for up to $3.1 million in reimbursable expenses. I worked with the town administrator and the school department to make sure that they were, number one, submitting the application, and number two, counting everything that was possible in submitting that application. My understanding, they were able to account for just under $3 million in reimbursable expenses. That money should be forthcoming very shortly. I'm told that it's just about to be distributed to the cities and towns. But remember, this was not regular budget money. This was for extra expenses that the cities and towns had to spend because of COVID-19. So, you know, that certainly helps, but, you know, the Natick had some unanticipated expenses, and
that
the federal government bailed us out.
And there's a bit of confusion on our end for Protect Natick's Future, because you say reimbursement, but it seems like it's also could be almost like pre-reimbursement for FY21. Obviously, we've had to spend some money in FY20, but yeah, I don't know what you call a pre-reimbursement.
It's a little bit of both.
Okay.
Like I said, I encourage the town to, we'll say, maximize the reimbursable expenses. Mm-hmm. And I think they did an excellent job of that. But, you know, there's also going to be a pot of money available to school districts we're going to say, to do retrofitting, to get ready for when the kids eventually come back into the class buildings. And that money, Governor Baker has reached an agreement with my leadership in the House and the Senate President, Senator Spilka. It's $225 million that is going to be distributed on a per student basis. So Natick actually wins in that, quite frankly. If that money had gone into, say, the Chapter 70 formula, we would be below the mean because of our relative affluence, I'll say. So that's going to be helpful money in making sure that the school department doesn't have to dip into its regular budget to do the type of retrofitting that is going to be necessary come September.
And just to be clear, is that the $225 per student, up Correct. To $225 that the commissioner spoke about?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
That's what that is, yeah.
So we're just waiting to hear what that up to means, right? Because we don't know.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, again, it will probably be a reimbursement rather than a direct check and spend the money if you want to. But I'll say that Natick has done a very good job of optimizing and applying for these types of reimbursement programs. I'm confident they'll do a good job.
No, and that's great to know, because I know specifically for our CARES Act, there was about $2.8 million targeted towards capital improvements. So it sounds like this development might free up some of the money we thought we would spend for capital improvements from the right. CARES Act to be spent in other ways.
Right, but always remember, I always say money is the ultimate fungible good. So money is money. So that's why, you know, like I've said for 20 years, I've made it my priority to try to find money for the city, for Natick, Sherburne, and Millis in any one of any line item that I can find.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Representative Linsky.
Sure.
I want to end with a video that Senator Roush was able to send to us, and I also want to, before I play it, I want to also mention that Senator Karen Spilka is the president of the Senate, which is especially important because, you know, she's worked hard. She has the respect of her peers and is able to bring things, I think, to pass maybe in a different way than other senators. So we're grateful for that leadership and that Natick is represented by both. So let's hear now from Senator Roush. Bear with me for a second as I figure this out.
Here. I'm so sorry that I can't be with you in person, but I'm really grateful for the opportunity to send you this quick video. And thank you so much to the organizers and also to all of you who are attending and watching this video. And also, of course, thank you to my partners in the legislative delegation, Senate President Karen Spilka and State Representative David Linsky. We're here, of course, this evening, or you're here this evening to talk about state funds and the intersection of state funding with local funding. This is a tough and complicated time, as probably many of you already know. It's complicated for the state, and it is absolutely complicated for all of our municipalities, including Natick. I absolutely share residents' concerns about the budget and economic forecasts. It's not a rosy picture. And as the Senate Chair of the Joint Committee on Municipalities and Regional Government, I have been spending a lot of time looking at this picture and the implications for our towns and cities throughout the state. It's tough. We've got a tough road ahead, and we're going to keep working. Personally, I'm going to keep working to secure progressive revenue sources to try to lessen the blow on our state economy. It's also really important that everyone reach out to our great partners in the federal delegation, because the reality here is that the state must pass a balanced budget every year, where the federal government, on the other hand, can both operate at a deficit and print money. So we all know the financial impact here for Natick and every other municipality in the Commonwealth is very real. And frankly, we're going to need help from DC on this. Please don't hesitate to reach out to my office to let me and my staff know about your budget priorities. You can call us directly at 617-722-1555. My legislative aide, Evan Berry, is here with you this evening. You can also email me directly at becca.roush@masenate.gov. We do check the voicemail and our emails frequently. And also, if you've never engaged in a state budget process before, you might want to check out episode 1 of a video series that I have been doing with State Rep Maria Robinson called Low Budget Beacon Hill. You can go to our website, beccaroushma.com /low budget Beacon Hill with dashes in between, or just go to the homepage and click on Low Budget Beacon Hill. Episode 1 is all about the budget and all about how the budget process works. So you can get some really helpful tips and insights there as to how the budget unfolds on Beacon Hill. Also, very important, don't forget to vote. As you're watching this, your town election will be tomorrow, Tuesday, June 30th. If you didn't request a mail-in ballot, that's okay. You can go and vote in person. If your mail-in ballot doesn't come in time to cast it, you can still go and vote in person. And also, I think as many of you know, the state legislature has been very hard at work. It's been a top priority of mine to make sure we have comprehensive mail-in voting options for the fall elections in both September and November. So keep your eyes peeled for additional information as the contents of that bill get finalized. That process is unfolding right now. The House has passed a version, the Senate has passed a slightly different version, and those differences are being worked on as you watch this video. So thanks again for having me. Don't hesitate to reach out. Please don't hesitate to share your questions this evening with Evan directly, and I look forward to hearing from you. Be safe, be well, take care, everyone.
Thank you.
So I want to thank everyone for coming tonight, and just want to end here with this slide. How you can join us after tonight. As both elected officials said tonight, that tomorrow you can vote if you have not already. And on our Protect Natick's website is our election survey. Emily, could you do me a favor and publish the slides in the chat box so that everybody could have the link?
Yes.
Thank you. So check out our election survey. If you're not sure who's in your precinct for town meeting members, you can read their responses. We continue to listen and learn at all of the meetings in town. There's several important meetings this week. We invite you to stay informed on our, join our email list and email us directly to talk to your town meeting members. And most excitedly, well, not most excitedly, but the most recent development is that we are launching PNF Connects, and that's a program this summer to connect senior citizens who might be feeling a little bit isolated with kids and families who are feeling a little bored because there's not enough programming. So in that last link, once these slides will be shared, you can click on any of these links and find information about anything that we've done. We're grateful again to, for everyone that's provided input tonight, and especially to David Linsky for being with us. And just want to say thank you to everyone. Representative Linsky, do you want to say one more thing?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. One thing I noticed that you mentioned the first time that you met me was in front of Roche Brothers.
Yeah.
Well, it's hard to meet people at Roche Brothers these days, given the masks and the pandemics and how people feel when they go into the grocery store. So I'm encouraging people to call me, to email me. It's david.linsky@mahouse.gov, david.linsky@mahouse.gov. I pride myself on being accessible. I always say, if you see me around town, whether it's at the supermarket or the dry cleaner or whatever, to say hello. Even with these pandemics, smile through your mask, and I'm happy to talk. But thank you very much for the opportunity tonight.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. We hope to see you at the polls. Good luck to all the town meeting members tomorrow.